What's going on, everybody? Welcome to, back to actual live streams for LUMIX Live. It has been a crazy last 3 weeks. Obviously, there's a lot to cover. So wanted to dive kind of right into this one and just kind of talk right about the new firmware update, hence the title, New Update, Who Dis? And just kind of like go through, answer y'all's questions, walk through how to set certain things up. Obviously, one of the bigger things, too, that you see here is that we've got the Frame I/O, the camera to cloud functionality. So I'm actually going to take a section and we're going to walk through how that works, how you set it up, what you can do in the menu, and how you set it all up. So we're going to go through that, talk about all the new autofocus improvements, the function that you have for doing pre-burst stills, and a lot of kind of cool stuff. But also throughout this, we're just going to take the time and just kind of jump back into some of the AMA, Ask Me Anything kind of stuff that we've done over the while, since it's been quite a bit of time since I have talked to y'all. I think this is actually the longest hiatus we've taken on the stream since we've started these things. So on the one hand, it was very nice for my mental health, although that gets replaced with trade shows and training events and stuff like that. But it's great to be back. It's awesome to be back here with all of you and hopefully answering a bunch of questions. So we haven't done this in a while, but let us know in the chat where you're actually joining us from. We typically get people from all over the world, and it's awesome to see, where everyone's tuning in from. I just like seeing how big our community has grown over the last couple of years of doing these. And yeah, with that, I want to remind everybody in the US about LUMIX Pro services. We have the Red and the Platinum tier available. Red is the free one. If you've bought a LUMIX camera, get yourself registered, follow the QR code or the link on the screen. It's free, so you get yourself on Red. If you're looking at something for a little bit higher level of service and support, you can get yourself registered on the Platinum tier. That gets you 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways, 20% off out of warranty repairs if you drop, break lens, camera, things like that. You also get our membership hotline, so you're able to actually speak to someone from 9 to 5 East Coast time. If you prefer to actually speak to someone to troubleshoot some issues. And then you still get a pretty cool little welcome kit, which is the Peak Design strap, last I checked, which is a nice little change out from the straps that all of our camera companies provide us right out of the box. So, encourage you to take a look at those. Links in the description, as well as we have the cards that just went up, so you can always go back and play those later. Yeah, let's take a look at some of the questions that came in first before we jump too deep into this. Any way to to custom non-working shutter button in S5II to a different button to take photos, maybe remote shutter release. Okay, if you're ever having a problem like that with any piece of equipment, contact your local service team. Get the camera into them. They're going to want to see it. They're going to want to take a look and replace shutter button if need be, because you shouldn't have to do a workaround, with anything like that. So first and foremost, contact your local service team. That's not normal operation. You want to get that checked out and have them replace pieces if they need be. Other than that, if you don't have time to do that right now, I know some people had commented in there that there is touch shutter, so you do have the ability on the touchscreen of the camera. Easiest way to do this, I have to remember which, yeah, this is the menu that I have. So actually, I can do this one. I have a different menu here. So now I can actually point to certain things. If you want to enable the touch system here for like touch shutter, you would go into touch settings, which is under the gear icon, and then under operations, it's the first page of the operations menu here. Go to touch settings, and you want to turn touch tab on. When touch tab is on, this will give you a little drawer on the side of the camera that you can have come out. And one of the options in the middle there is to turn on like touch AF, to turn on touch shutter. That's one thing that you can do in the meantime, but like I said, I highly recommend if you are having an issue like that, get it into a service team. Let's see here. Digi says, I just got G9 Mark II. What are the chances of having the battery icon turn another color like green when using PD over USB-C? It's very hard to see the little tick mark above the battery. That is a really good recommendation, and I will bring it up to the engineering team. I don't know the feasibility behind it, but I don't see why. Well, one, asking never hurts, so we'll definitely bring that up to them. But yeah, we'll see if that's something they can do. Let's see here. Love the new firmware. This is from Steph. Says, love the new firmware. How do I know if OIS is working at the same time as IBIS and E-stabilization on high, other than the icon in the top right-hand corner of the touchscreen? So, general rule with the way our stabilization works is that if your lens has OIS, if it's a LUMIX lens with OIS or a Sigma lens with OIS, like the 150 to 600 or the 60 to 600, when those lenses are attached, it is using dual IS. It's using optic and sensor shift stabilization. Even when you toggle on things like the EIS options now, the high option that we'll talk about, or things like Boost IS, which is just a more powerful mechanical, it's an electromagnetic system, it's always running. If you're using adapted lenses, that's where it's a little different, because when you turn the lens stabilization off, and this depends on some of the lenses, that's where it gets a little murkier. That's where it will basically be like either in-body stabilization or lens stabilization, because they don't have the communication info there. But if you're using a LUMIX lens, it's always on. When stabilization's on, dual IS is running if the lens has OIS functionality. Let's see here. Al says, now we can get OpenGate 6K on Super 35 sensor when shooting with E-stabilization on high. Any chance we can get OpenGate 6 sensor for APS-C sensor without E-stabilization on? So, I know you're referencing, I think it's Dustin's video about that, when he was running around NAB, which was quite funny to watch from the outside. I don't know the details behind how that is working. So I can ask the team, like, hey, is it possible to get the OpenGate option? And I think what people might not understand or maybe conflating here is that OpenGate just refers to using the entire sensor height and width. So that is gonna be full sensor height and width, the 6K. That can refer to the field of view, so the full 3:2 aspect ratio on full frame, or the full 4:3 aspect ratio on like the GH6 or the G9 Mark II. It doesn't, if you crop into Super 35 on a full frame sensor, you're technically not shooting OpenGate. You're shooting in Super 35. So it's not really the right terminology to use. What exists currently in the camera is the 4:3 aspect ratio for the higher frame rates, which is in the Super 35 region. So it's using the 4:3 ratio from that centralized region. And that's going to get you the, I think it's like 4.4K or something. The 6K side of it, because of the E-stabilization, that's the part where I'm not sure. And that has opened a couple questions that I have for our team as well. So, yeah. Let's see here. I saw a couple of things here. Oh, awesome. People are chiming in. We've got some team from Japan, from Chicago, Wisconsin, Finland, Northern Ireland, Germany, England. Awesome. This is great. Ian says, thank you for the awesome update. Well, you're welcome. I am fully no, I can't even joke that way. The update is one of the kind of bigger things that obviously, you know, as we've been going on as a company, we've always tried to do as much as we can, firmware update wise, to add new features, to add new functionality. And when I was playing with or working with this firmware before it came out, it was very clear to me like how much more powerful the update is. So that's why I wanted to take the time and hopefully walk you all through this in the next like couple of minutes. We'll jump over and actually go through the camera. Let's see here. I think it's Jean says, thank you. thanks to you and everyone at LUMIX for the update. It was wonderful. If it was, I was wondering if it's possible to map single button to switch to the APS-C teleconverter mode for photo, as it takes 2 steps. So at the moment, no. You do have to go in and toggle on the teleconverter option and then toggle in your resolution change for the JPEGs. Because of the way the system is designed, that means that your JPEGs are the ones that are going to get the cropped effect, where your raw images won't. So current deployment is, yes, that it's a 2-step process. I don't know if it's something that would be changed to add just like straight up an APS-C photo option, but it has my support. I know it has a couple other people's support within the company, as would be, you know, really cool to have, because it does make it easy to have that. But again, that's something we'll have to bring up to the engineering team and see, like, hey, is this something that's on the roadmap to do? Let's see here. Hal says, is there any way to hide the focus area brackets on the GH6? Sometimes I find them distracting when composing and would love to clear display for full immersion. So, yeah, the manual focus, like the bracket icons, you can't get rid of them. They're always up. There's different logics behind it. One logic, which is I think the logic we take currently, is that there are more times where people are going to have problems because you don't know where your punch-in is going to be on that camera if you take them off, and that can cause a lot more problems on the service and support side. So as far as general usability goes, that tends to be the overwhelming, that's the better way to do it, have that reference. That being said, I understand the perspective you have on this. So it is something I know that Matt Fraser and I have asked a lot about over the years. Like, is this something that we can at least toggle? Make it so that those that want to have it there have it. Those that don't want it there don't have to have it. But I haven't heard anything updated on that front. So, all right, let's do 2 more questions, and then we'll jump over to going through the camera system here. Carlos says, is it possible to also have the box on the eye for human AF, or have the option to switch between the current AF display and the box on the eye? That is definitely one of the things that we've asked a lot about. Now with the update that we have animal eye detection, which is just the box on the animal eye, we've had a lot of feedback getting into the engineers to say, like, hey, at least give us the option to do that. Again, this kind of relates to the previous question about, you know, wanting something that's maybe a bit cleaner looking of a display. I know that the team has been looking into it as far as the UI change goes. UI changes are a very... they're not a quick thing to happen. UI changes go through a lot of process to make sure that, okay, if we make this UI change, what is the impact for everybody across the board? Those that may have absolutely no problem with it and prefer the way that we're doing it. And then obviously from the actual software coding side, making sure that everything works and it's functioning the way it should. But I know that it has been brought up to them. I know that it is something that we have been looking at, but I have no idea as far as like if and when something like that would be changed. But we'll always definitely keep you updated, and this is one of the platforms that you would hear about it first. So, yeah. Let's see here. Where did we go? Thank you, YouTube, jumping around. Brandon says, shooting on S5 Mark II 20-60 kit lens, and after the update, when using the high option for IS, I can see the black edges while stabilization is doing its job. Is that normal? 20-60 kit lens, after the update, when using high option for IS, I can see the black edges while stabilization is doing its job. I haven't seen that before. I'd be curious to see what that looks like, because the high option does a crop into the frame, so you're even farther away from the edges of the framing, so you shouldn't see vignetting or anything like that. I guess probably one of the first things I double check is make sure that the 20 to 60 millimeter lens is updated. We do have there is an update posted for that lens. So I just dropped that down in the chat. So obviously just make sure your lenses are updated. After you do a major feature firmware update on any camera, it is advised to do a full reset of the camera. In certain cases, and this is one of the things that I think as new objects get added to firmware, so new capabilities, there can be situations where, because we've refined the code, because the way in general things just get more streamlined and certain stuff moves a bit in the menus, if you've got your camera set up a certain way before and it happens to be trying to utilize a certain aspect that may have moved slightly in the code, that can cause oddities, and this is true for all camera brands. It is generally recommended to do a factory reset and then either try reloading your settings, which should be fine, or just taking a mental note or a note of like what settings you have. That's not necessarily true for every update, but it's really when you have like these major upgrades that happen to firmware that add new features, because like one, our autofocusing system, right? The difference between the way the old UI looked and the way the new system works fundamentally are different. So if you've got certain things set up on the way it was working up until the 21st, that's cool, but after the 21st, because of the way things got shifted around and optimized better, you may have some oddities that show up if you don't reset the camera. So with that, let's actually kind of like talk about the camera. So, and don't worry, rest of the questions, we're gonna pick up the questions with Linus's question about the ProPhoto system here. And as far as that one goes, I actually don't have an update on ProPhoto Connect and compatibility with our system. So, the new firmware update. Lots and lots of cool stuff added in with this new firmware update. To start with, let's kind of just go like top down on what's new in this whole system. So we'll break this into two categories. We'll start with the video functionality first, because that is probably the more in-depth with what's been added. And then we'll jump to the photo one, and then I swear I will actually get these chaptered after this goes. Usually takes about a day because the video has to process on YouTube before I can actually review it and actually start getting all the chapters in. So, so the new update with the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark IIX added a couple of really cool functions to it. So first off, let's start with proxy recording. Those of you that have never worked with proxy recording or have no idea what it is, proxy recording allows you to be able to take the recording that you're doing in a higher quality option. So in this case, we've got 4K 30p, 422 10-bit all-I, and also go in and at the same time add in the ability to record a smaller compressed version of the footage to a secondary media source, so that you've got something that's a bit easier to edit with for those that may not have like overpowered PCs, or those of you that are working on Macs, but maybe it's a little bit older of a Mac. This is a really nice addition to the camera so that you've got more flexibility in your workflow side of the camera. So if you want to find out which options have proxy recording, it's actually pretty simple with our cameras. You're going to go into the camera menu that you see there. Then you're going to go into rec quality. So this will be under the image format page 1. Then you're going to go into rec quality, and this is where you'll be able to use the display filtering function. So if you press the display button here, you'll see that we've now added proxy recording as a filterable option. Default, it's going to show any, which means if you're in the MOV recording, you're going to have 59 different recording options. When you go into proxy and you turn this on, you'll see it drops down to 29. Press display again, and now the menu is only going to show you the options that enable you to record proxy recordings. So you'll see this goes all the way up to C4K 60p at the high bit rate. So anything C4K 60p and below, you'll be able to do this with. I'm going to select the 30p option again, just because that's what my HDMI output is expecting. So it's easier to make sure I don't screw up my switcher. So cool. We're in 4K, 30p, 422 10-bit all-I. And just as a point of note, I'm still getting used to this. Right there, it tells you proxy available, HLG available, slow and quick available, recording slot availability. You want to look for the one that says proxy availability. When it says proxy availability, that means that you're able to enable this proxy recording function. So cool, we've got proxy, and then now you'll see 2 steps below that, we've got proxy recording settings. Here is where I can come in and I can now turn on proxy recording. Now, cool thing about this, well, couple things. First off, you have to have 2 memory cards in the camera if you're using internal SD storage for this. You have to have a card 1, card 2 in the camera, because card slot 2 is where the proxy files are recorded, no matter what. So make sure that you've got a good card in both card slot 1 and card slot 2. Once you know that, you can turn this on. For those of you that are using external SSDs, Proxy still works. Proxy will record the main high-res file to the SSD, but the proxy file will still be recorded to SD card slot number 2. That's the bottom slot on the side of the camera. So just remember that. If you're shooting and all of a sudden you're wondering, why isn't this doing proxies? I have everything turned on. Most of the time so far since the firmware came out, it's been people forgot card slot 2. So, yeah. Once you have all that, just press the OK button. Then you'll see proxy rec quality. Here you have 3 options available, and the bit rates will depend slightly based on what frame rate you have the camera set to. 60 frames per second will shoot at a higher bit rate, 30 at a slightly lower, 24 at a slightly lower. And when I say slightly, I mean like by 1 or 2 megabit. So these are very inconsequential differences. But the reason we have 3 separate proxies in here are all down to the various different use cases. So for one, your high and medium options, these are both going to be 1080p. The proxy files are going to come out as 420 10-bit, so they're HEVC files. So you're going to get still flexibility for grading with log on the proxy files if that's what you need to do. So you just have different bit rates here. This partially ties to the Frame.io camera to cloud functionality that we'll talk about. But in a lot of cases, too, this can just be good for, I just need a very simple low bit rate recording, and you just don't want to have to worry about a much higher bit rate, because higher bit rate is larger files. Then we have the 720p option. So for those that actually still want to record in 720p, or maybe you need 720p for the computer that you're working on, at least for the edit, you've got a 4 megabit per second 720p option. In this case, the 4K 30p. So that means that the main file is going to be 4K 30p. Your proxy is going to be 720p in 420 or 420 8-bit. The 720p option is 8-bit because it's an H.264, and that'll be 4 megabit. So I typically leave it on high because I'm not really hurting for bandwidth if I want to use camera to cloud, and I would prefer to have the higher res in here. So cool. Select high. Cool. Then you've got this other option here called real-time LUT proxy. And when I click on this and says, hey, you can't set that because you're in like 709. Okay. So if I want to use the ability to take the main video file and say record it in log, but I want to have my proxy be saved out with the LUT applied, so have the LUT burned into that footage, because maybe I'm shooting video and it's literally for social media where I don't need a ton of editing with it. I'm just going to shoot it. It's going to go to a social team, or I just want to have quick access to it so that I can upload 1080p proxies right away for social. You have the ability to apply the LUT on top of that proxy file individually, so it's separated from your main recording file. The way you do this, there's a couple different ways that you can do it. Some people have different options of how they want to set it up. But the way I recommend doing it is going back into Photo Styles, which is under the Image Quality 1 page. selecting the real-time LUT option, then scrolling down to where it says LUTs, going in and selecting what LUT you want to use. In this case, I'm going to use, this is one of Nick Driftwood's LUTs, so definitely go check out his page. He's got a bunch of really cool looks on there, and this one is a really nice kind of example of how different a look can be from standard Rec. 709. So we're going to have this turned on, but before you leave this screen, disable it on the menu here. Just have it so that in the bottom where it says what LUT you have ready to go, have that there, but just make sure that you turn this so you're not looking at the LUT. You're looking at a log piece of footage. Once you have that set, then I can come down back into the proxy settings, and you'll see that real-time LUT proxy is now something that I can enable. Now, the footage that I capture, if I go back to this one, the footage that I capture, my main recording, my 4K, 422 10-bit, all-I, 30 frames per second footage is going to be captured in log, but my proxy file is going to have that LUT pre-applied to it. So again, this makes it easy for video creation where I just need a quick 1080p clip. Either it's going to a client that is just going to preview dailies, things like that, if you're looking at a little bit higher end of a section. If you're using the Frame.io camera to cloud functionality, you'll have this up in for maybe a social media team that's working on the project that you're working on, so that you've got the full flexibility of the main file for the highlight piece or the main product that you're producing. But then you've got a very close to final result for social posting, stuff like that. Clear? Cool. On top of the general setups for proxy recording, again, just to recap, make sure that you have 2 cards in the camera. Your proxy files are always going to record into card slot 2. And when you look on the main screen of the display, and actually, I think I could show it. Nope, I got to do it in this one. If you look on the far left of your screen, right under where you have the HDMI red icon, you'll now see a new icon that's 2 squares with a PX written in there. That'll indicate to you that you are recording proxies. The other thing that you'll notice is that down at the bottom where the card slot indicators are, you now have 1 and 2 with a dot in the middle and the arrow, which is typically seen as the backup recording icon. So now if I start recording, you'll see that, okay, I'm running. I've got a little bit of a clip here. We're capturing content. Now you'll see that both of those cards are red. When I stop recording, it's writing to it. Card slot 1 may take a little bit longer than card slot 2 because it's going to be a bigger file. And then now my proxy is saved on card slot 2. My main file is on card slot 1. Cool? All right, let's see some of the other comments that came through here. Focus transition function. This is from, I think it's Jens. It says focus transition function in G9 Mark II is great, but settings are lost when zooming. Please stop that or add a presetting so that I can use focus transition fast. So the reason it changes, the reason why focus transition changes when you zoom is because mirrorless lenses, even though we have electronically parfocal with ours, is based on your focal length and the range that you set. So when you zoom, you are changing what those distances are. They don't mean the same thing. So because of that, if you set it all up and then zoom, you have to set it up again. That's just how the system works. Let's see here. Chris says, will there be an update to be able to record only 1 audio channel rather than 4 at a time, with 2 being blank? I have asked a lot about this one. I honestly don't have an answer yet. I agree it would be nice to toggle on and off the 2 extra channels if you're not using them, but I don't know if or when something like that would be able to get firmware updated. Obviously, our engineering team and our software team's been working really hard to get this update out, making sure that the Frame.io, the camera to cloud stuff is working as it should and it's working smoothly, which in all of my experiences with it so far has been one of the smoothest implementations I've ever seen of camera to cloud. But now they get to continue working on some of the other projects that we've got in the pipeline for them. Sorry for the coffee. It's like the 4th cup today, and I'm still dragging here. Let's see here. Tommy, is there a way on the G9 Mark I to get it to display your focal length like the GH6 and Olympus cameras do? So not on the original G9. The focus information update is something that came in the newer processors and the newer communication updates. So unfortunately, the original G9, the original GH5, they don't have the equipment on board needed to read that information and display it up properly. So not everything we can... We try to get as much as we can updated, but we can't always get everything there. So sorry about that. Let's see here. The new, Al says, the new E-stabilization and resulting crop has opened a market segment for ultra-wide primes for vlogging. Could we convince you to bribe the engineering team to give us a 9mm prime? No. While I share your view, though, the ultra-wide angle lenses, I think, are now, especially because of the fact of like open gate being a very useful aspect ratio to film in these days. It seems like if you go online, you just can't avoid conversations about open gate, which means I'm doing my job and our team is doing our job because we believe so much in this functionality with this camera, and honestly with all of our cameras that have the ability to record from full sensor area, that yes, wider angle lenses now become a very nice benefit for it. Adding in the stabilization, meaning that you can run with the camera. Truth is, it just makes it easier for everybody to be able to capture footage. If you're someone who's much higher end, yeah, gimbals and things like that are still going to be a staple of the job. I still have an RS-C2. I have an RS3 Pro back here with the whole LiDAR thing and all that kind of fun stuff, and those are great, but there are times where I don't want to have that. And if I'm going to be doing like fast movement, or I'm going to be doing a little bit higher level of kind of recording and camera movements, I'm probably going to go back and use the gimbal at that point because I have more fine-tuned control over certain things like that. So all of that to say, ultra-wide lenses, I would love to see more of them. I don't know what our future roadmap looks like. I haven't seen one in a while, other than the one that is public that y'all have seen, especially for the S-series cameras. G-series, a little different. There's so many lenses out available for that market already. It's kind of hard to determine what you'd want to build next. But that's also kind of the nice thing about the L-mount system, the fact that it's Leica, Sigma, Panasonic. You've got all three major manufacturers making optics for this at all various different price levels and different focal lengths. Sigma makes some really nice ultra-wide angle lenses in full frame. But I think in full frame we're still at about 14 mil from, or no, we're at about 12 for the full frame from Leica, Sigma, or Panasonic. But you also have companies like Laowa and, was it TT Artisan was one of them for a while. You have a lot of these other companies that are making L-mount lenses, so they physically mount to it, and they are ultra-wide. You would just have to go in at that point and say, hey, I'm shooting on a 9mm. So there are options out there. Tommy says, specifically for when using a zoom lens, I've had a GH6 longer than my G9, and only recently tried it for stills instead of video and saw that the focal length pops up on the GH6. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. The focal length continuation there. Trini Media, hey Sean, the update for the S5II added great functionality to the camera. In post, the camera still has 4 sound channels. Yeah, that's, we talked about that a little bit before. Plus says, are 3x2 proxies possible at some point? At this point, I don't know. The proxy, the project for proxies to add into this camera was focused around the common the common aspect ratios. Because part of it was also as we've worked with the team over at Adobe for Frame.io on the integration there with what information is needed, what works properly there. That always is going to kind of take, precedent over everything else. Plus, we don't do a version of OpenGate at a lower resolution, so 6K is the resolution that we have for the 3x2. That being said, It's something that I know Matt and I have asked for. I know we've heard a lot of questions and commentary from all of you about saying, hey, it'd be really cool if you're able to do like a 4K version of Open Gate and just have it downsampled, but still keep the field of view. Those are things that we've passed up to the team, and I know that they're taking very serious look at, okay, is this something we can do? Again, now that we're past this particular firmware update, things happen in stages when you have updates. So you may not get everything all at once. Things get chunked off into, okay, these are the things that we can do within this deadline. These certain things may take a bit longer. And anything to do with image quality, so that would be recording, frame rates, resolutions, anything to do with downsampling or shifting what the resolution is for a file, that stuff takes an exorbitant amount of time. Not because it's necessarily hard, I'd say, and I don't mean this negative way for anyone that does that kind of work. It's more making sure that the end result matches to what your expectation is or your benchmarks internally are for image quality. So if it doesn't hit the benchmark for what we want as image quality, we won't do it. It has to hit a very specific level of quality on our side. So let's see here. Also, the okay, where was the first part of your question here? Wild Rose, does E-stabilization affect autofocus? I see some noticeable pulsing and drifting in and out of focus, especially when set to high. Also, the E-stabilization seems to not smooth out pans very well. Will Boost IS make this better? Okay, E-stabilization has zero effect on autofocus. What you probably would notice more in that particular case is because you're cropping in field of view for electronic stabilization. Can be a number of things. First off, the vast majority of people, and I'm not saying that this is you, but the vast majority of times, people got into the new system with the S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, and the G9 Mark II, and immediately applied the AF custom settings that you did from the previous generation cameras right into the new camera. And that's a massive mistake. Do not do that. Tried from day one with the S5 Mark II to explain this, but obviously my voice is only so loud in the crowd of the internet. Do not do that. Set the camera to 0 for AF custom settings, like the basic, and start there to make your adjustments, because what I found is that a lot of people, because of the shifts that you had to make on the older system, they're exponentially more twitchy on the newer system here. So if you're saying that you're seeing like maybe drifting or snapping in and out of focus faster than you'd really want it to, and it just kind of looks jarring, double check what your AF custom settings are for the most part. The other thing is that you have that control. If it's being too twitchy for you, because it's one of the kind of counters to phase detect for video is that in some cases it can be too fast, it can be too twitchy, because someone moves maybe about this much, and you don't want the system necessarily following it every little inch. It's okay if a person moves a slight little bit. That's what we do. You have the ability to smooth that out by turning the speed down or changing the responsiveness a bit. So that's one thing that that you might be noticing is because you're using a crop in for E-stabilization, you're cropping in on the framing. You're seeing closer. So any subtle little movement becomes more noticeable. And PDAF is not infallible. Make that clear. I don't care who makes it. It still screws up. I think Locke on YouTube just did a video showing that even some of the top tier best focusing cameras in the world do a lot of the same stuff that we do with the cameras as well. We all have certain areas. So that's one part of it. The other part, as far as smoothing out pans, this is a bit of a loaded thing. So if you are going to be panning with modern mirrorless cameras or any camera, there's two thought processes here. One, if you're going to be doing pans, turn stabilization off because you're on a tripod. You don't want anything to add into the frame that can potentially cause a hitch in your pan. Two, Panning speed depends on frame rate that you're recording at. If you don't want it to look jumpy or skippy, you have to be careful with how fast you pan based on the frame rate. It's one of those things that kind of has gone, you know, to the wayside in modern thinking, because now we think that in-body stabilization is like a silver bullet. It can fix everything. So that might be where some of the challenge is there with you. High E stabilization, or electronic stabilization in general, isn't always necessarily going to be best for things like panning, where you're deliberately trying to move the frame. And this goes doubly for Boost IS. Boost IS is not made for moving the camera. There are a bunch of people online talking about how if you've got Boost IS on, it makes for great tracking shots. Don't do that. Boost IS, from the description in the camera, is made for mimicking tripod, monopod, locked off shots. I don't think I can be any more clear about that. So what does that leave you is that if you're on a tripod and you want to be doing very deliberate pans, usually turn the stabilization off. And this is for any camera out there. You turn the stabilization off because you're controlling the movement. You have to make sure that your tripod's nice and stable and you're good to go. It can work on monopods too. You just potentially have a little bit more up and down movement as you're shifting the monopod. If you don't have monopods or anything like that, or a tripod, and you're going to be doing panning, that's actually a situation where I say to turn off E-stabilization and make sure Boost IS is off. Because you don't want any kind of additional area for the interpretation of your movement to be thought of as non-deliberate. Cameras these days are just computers. They will only do what you are telling them to do. They don't think, they don't have artificial intelligence in them. They don't have AI that can interpret what your meaning behind something is. So for movements, you have to be a bit deliberate there. So that's my diatribe on that. Hopefully that helps, Wild Ride. Nick Driftwood's here. Hey, hopefully you heard that I was shouting out your LUTs. I really like your LUTs. They're awesome. We've had a few requests regarding the luminance spot meter function. It would be helpful if its outline color could be color selectable. It can get lost on the screen. That's a really good recommendation. We'll get that over to the engineers, actually. I haven't heard that one before, but I like the logic there. Let's see here. All right, we're going to pause on the questions, and we're going to go back into looking at the camera here. All right, next up, let's actually talk Frame IO. Frame IO is probably the next logical move from the proxy recording functionality, and we'll start this with the video side of it. So, actually, I want to do this menu for it. So, if you have an Adobe Creative Cloud Solutions, if you have an Adobe Creative Cloud subscription, so photo video, if you have one of those, you have an Adobe Frame IO account also. If you don't, they have a free option that has 2 gigs of storage and will give you the ability to do camera to cloud. So I encourage you to play with it if you've never done it before. But how does this work? So Frame IO is built directly into the S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark IIX. This is something that we are using the internal wireless radios that we have in the camera. If you're on an S5IIX, you have the extended ability of being able to use the USB to Ethernet adapter for a much more stable connection. That's the only difference between the two cameras with this. But you'll see that it's in the menu here called under Frame IO. It's going to be under the wrench icon, under the in and out options 1. It's the same area where you're going to find Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, streaming if you're on an S5IIX. You have Frame IO. Literally, I'm just going to click Frame IO. And then the first thing that you're going to do is go to connection setup, go down to Wi-Fi connection settings. This is going to set up your Wi-Fi functionality. So right here, I've already got my camera connected or set up to be connected to my home network. So we've got my GLaDOS internet here, right? From there, this is where all you have to do is go up to Frame IO connection. Then you're going to go down to set, and you're going to click on set. And what we're going to see here, okay, good, my audio is still running. What we're going to see here, so this is Frame IO. We're going to go pairing. Actually, I can bring it back to this one for right now. what we're going to see is now it's set up. It's connecting to my home internet. It's connecting on the 5 gigahertz band for connecting into my network. 5 gigahertz band is going to enable you to do faster transmission. If you're on an iOS or an Android device, you can do this with just tethering, and then I get a code right there. This code allows me to pair it to my Frame.io account. So now, in my Frame.io account here, I'm literally going to create a new project. Now, the first thing you want to make sure is that you enable camera to cloud, and then we'll just name this test. And let's create the project. So now I have a project. Yep, I just created this account, so we're set. Once you're here, you're going to see C2C connection. We're going to do add new device, device ready to connect. And now I enter that number, so 811303. Now you'll see here that it recognized the camera that I'm trying to connect. I want to authorize. It's going to connect here. This particular one is, there you go, connected. You'll see on the camera itself, it says connection successful. There's the test. You have the information here. Click finish. And then now you're going to get a little green light on the option here for the camera that you've got connected. Cool? All right. So now, from here, all I'm going to do is press the OK button. It reconfirms and says, yes, you are connected. You have the camera connected into that project. And cool. Well, what do you do now? Now here you have a couple options. You can either send images to Frame.io. This is if you've got a bunch of images or video on the card that you want to send up, add to the queue. Cool, you can do that manually. Or you can go to Upload Setup. Upload Setup enables me to have Auto Upload queue turned on, which means that as I'm capturing photos and videos, it's going to be automatically loading them to the queue and sending them up into Frame.io. But I can also come in here and do Upload File Format. This lets me select and say I want proxies, I want JPEGs, and I want RAW files. So say I want to have all three set up. You'd use the menu button, you click, which you put a check mark on each one that you want, and then push the display button. That's it. Once that's enabled, now if I come back and we go to the main shooting setting here, so I had the proxy setups on here. Now, let me see how I can do this that makes it look the coolest. So, I'm starting to record right now. We've got this footage here. I've got my S5II, my S5IIX, harmonic microphones, things like that. Cool. We're recording. And it's doing the proxy and the 4K file as it sits. Well, if I stop this recording and go right to my Frame account, what you'll see in a second here is new files added, cloud devices, the date, videos, because I just captured a video, the camera that captured it, and then now that file is here and it's already uploaded. Now the coolest part about this is that I had the real-time LUT functionality turned on. What that means is that this has that LUT applied to it already versus just showing me RAW. And I can go and view up to 1080p because it's a 1080p file. If I click on file information, the part that's being blocked is just the file name and my uploader name. You'll see it's HEVC, 1920 by 1080, 30 frames per second, 405 frames, gives you the PCM audio information. It gives you everything that you need to be able to actually look, view, and watch that footage, but also be able to come through and say like, hey, at this point, I can then come in if I'm working with a client, they can add comments, and then I can pin it to that point. And now at that particular point, I know that there's a comment that I need. I can also come in and then you can actually come in and paint, say like that, and then add a comment here like fix, send this. Now, as I go through, you're going to see that you have all of these kind of comments on there. It makes it pretty straightforward for people to do collaborative work. But it doesn't just stop with the video functionality. If I turn this to my photo mode, and hopefully my switcher just works. Of course it's not going to. Thank you, A10 Mini. There we go. Now we're back up. So now I have that proxy recording set up for video. But now I say I want to do photos for this. So I have the camera set to RAW and JPEG. So as I take a couple of pictures here, and then I jump back to the frame menu, you'll see new files added. If I go back into that date, you'll now see two separate files here. I've got video and stills. If I click into stills, again, it's broken out by the camera model. Now you'll see that the RAW, the JPEGs, they're loading in, and I just took 3 images, and they're quickly uploading. So if I'm out in the field and say I'm only doing JPEGs, I'll have these images ready to go so that I can review them, make sure that everything's good, and again, still add that commentary to the footage so that I don't have to worry about, is this file good? Do I need to shoot this job, then go back home, find out that, like, hey, I missed a whole bunch of stuff. This makes it pretty easy for that. And then on top of it, if I'm going to be delivering for, say, social media for a client, I've got the ability to just be shooting, capturing, loading all this stuff up, and I can have a social media manager watching this folder as it comes in and start creating all this stuff to be ready to deliver right away. Coolest part is I'm showing you connected to my home network. If you've got a mobile device with tethering functionality, just tether off your mobile device. You can also tether off hotspots, things like that. If it's an open network that doesn't require like a web page to log into, you can connect the camera to it, and you're good to go. Once you make this connection the first time for the camera to cloud functionality, and I turn the camera off, it will auto reconnect when I power the camera back on to that network. And it'll also, if I've got a ton of photos in the queue and I power the camera off, it'll also tell you, hey, do you want me to wait until all this upload is done and it will just keep uploading? Or do you want me to pause the upload for when you repower the camera back on later? This way you don't miss items that are in the queue. So that's the Frame.io functionality. It's really slick. And if you don't have a Frame.io account, I encourage you to go get the free one. Try it if you've got this camera. It's so slick. Even if all you're doing is sending up JPEGs because maybe you want to do that instead of using the sync app, you've got a really slick way to do this. I was doing it at NAB while we were out having dinner, while we were walking around Fremont Street, just kind of relaxing. Having the camera be able to do that meant all my images were immediately up so that I can just open the app on my iPhone, pull them down, and just be able to post up some cool shots throughout the day. So, what do we got next here? I think I can close that now. Cool. Roger says, I have S5IIX on the way to complement my two S5IIs. Frame.io is great, but I wish I can connect the camera to my PC with Wi-Fi for tethering in the studio. I've definitely gotten that question there. Wirelessly tethering to a computer for that kind of thing. I think the Frame.io functionality shows a really cool direction to work with it now. Because it's cloud storage, because you don't have to worry about being necessarily directly tethered to a computer, dealing with any kind of potential Wi-Fi interference between your computer and your camera. From using all the various different systems, I would still argue that the Frame.io is actually probably the smoothest, especially in a studio. But yeah, it's a pretty sick little setup there. So let's see what else we got. There were a couple more questions that came in, and I just realized that I just jumped way far down in those questions. Where did that go? How do I connect my Godox TT350 to my GH5? Flash settings can't open. The Godox TT350 doesn't directly connect to our camera. They have the TTL protocols, but not the control protocols directly in the camera. You'd have to use external trigger for stuff like that, and even then the trigger would be what is controlling the flashes. Let's see here. FC says, are proxy files created while video is recording, or can proxies be created after video is captured, i.e. from playback? Proxies are only captured for like while you're recording. So you can't go back in and create proxies from files that didn't have them created. Let's see here. Did you have some feedback from Shutter Showdown? Did it do well? Can we expect another series? Shutter Showdown went really, really well. Awesome. The viewership was great. The overall concept of it was great, and we're always looking to do another series like that. We've got some learnings that we took away from the first season of it, and when we're ready to come out with another one, you know where it's going to get posted and where we're going to shout from the shout from the rooftops about it. Maybe I need a little more coffee still. John Simo did a really cool Panasonic hoodie mock-up. Would love to see some merch like that to rep. Yeah, we've gotten a lot of questions about repping merch and wanting to be able to purchase some like the shirts and the hoodies and stuff like that some of us have. Yes, at the moment, yeah, we're just not there yet. Let's see here. Feature request from D Creative says, can LUMIX cameras become open to accepting audio through the cold shoe mount when using the DJI Mic 2 like it does with the XLR1? I did just see that update. That does look really cool for that microphone. And I know that our team has already sent some requests over like that, because that is a pretty slick integration. Let's see here. Yen says, instead of focus transition, can you make us a new focus bracketing function but for 60 FPS video mode? I don't know what that would do that's different than focus transition. If you can give me a little more detail, I can take a look and see. Let's see here. Trini says, at this time, the L-mount doesn't have a 400 f2.8 for shooting live sports. Can you make a suggestion for the engineers to make one? Yeah, we can make a suggestion for it. I don't know how soon something like that would come out. Certain priorities when you look at what's happening across the board as far as the cameras that come out, the lenses that are being released, the concept behind the products. Don't necessarily mix at the moment for something like a 400-2.8, but we're always looking into the future for development and where we want to take the system next. So yeah, we'll definitely pass that one on. Plus says, the punch-in image quality seems a bit better. Is it just me? I've honestly not looked at it. I'm not one that honestly uses punch-in manual focus that often. And when I do, it's usually more than enough for me. Depth of field covers more than usually I'm ever needing for critical focus like that. I don't manual focus it wide open, so, but I can take a look at it. Yeah. Alan says, having real-time LUT on the GH6 would be really appreciated as part of an upcoming update if there is any. Well noted. I think it's Macari. Says, thanks again for doing these streams, Sean. For G9 Mark II, why can't set AFC or AFS to custom set? Also, any chance for autofocus in 300 FPS slow-mo? So two points here. Autofocus in 300 frames per second slow-mo isn't going to happen. I believe you have push AF, if I remember correctly. So that's where you can have it focus once and then it starts recording. But continuous autofocus isn't something that's going to come for 300 FPS. That is just the focusing system paired with the fact that 300 FPS is a overcranked frame rate combination. So it's doing 300 FPS. Then it also has to process that down into the 24 frames per second. That's why it doesn't autofocus. That's also why it doesn't have audio. As far as not being able to set AFC or AFS into the custom settings number, or the custom settings options there, part of the reason for this is because the the autofocus continuous, autofocus manual, and autofocus single options on these cameras are a hardware switch. So if you do something program-wise that says, hey, save this as autofocus single, go into that mode, but the switch on the camera is set to AFC, there's a conflict there. So because it needs the hardware, because it's based on the hardware switch for autofocus single, continuous, and manual focus, that's why it's not able to be programmed in for the custom settings. You'd have to, it has to be done through that switch there on these cameras. Let's see here. JC, any chance we can get 2110 IP video compatibility in an update for future LUMIX cameras? Maybe USB-C to 10 gigabit adapter. Also, 21.9 recording could be considered down the line as well. Well, that's a lot. 2110 IP video compatibility. That would be a question I would have to pose over to Matt Fraser or Neil Matsumoto. I think that's one of the new standards. It's an area that I'm not super well versed in, unfortunately. But who knows? USB-C to 10 gig Ethernet adapter. Well, if you're on the S5IIX, you do have USB-C to Ethernet adapter, although I think they are only 1 gig adapters. And then 21.9 recording. So Cinema... Is that... No, it's not CinemaScope. That's just the ultra-wide. We can ask. Yeah, we can definitely ask. Let's see here. Regardless of settings, it seems AFC is slower on G9 Mark II than the OM1, especially for requiring birds in flight. Any firmware can make it zippier. Once it's locked on, it's great. I don't really have much of a comment on, versus the OM1. I let the independent reviewers speak on that one. And I know that many of them have been shooting with it, and it's kind of a roll of the dice as far as which one is faster. So, yeah, it's kind of where I am on that one. Where was that one? Roger says, I have S5... Oh, wait, no, that was the one I answered before. I think it's either Powell or Pavel. Please pass your engineer's humble request for high-quality power OIS 2.8 to f4 micro four thirds super zoom, something with a 12 to 120 or a 14 to 140, basically faster, longer with sync IS than the 12 to 100 power zoom. Definitely will pass that on to the team. Don't know if that's something that they would be doing at this moment, but we'll definitely ask them. Al says, with Blackmagic design in the Rebel Alliance, any chance LUMIX could get gyro data used similarly as Blackmagic cameras in Resolve to fix rolling shutter jello effect? Okay, gyro data does not fix rolling shutter. Rolling shutter is an effect of sensor readout speed. Gyro data will not fix that. If you whip pan a camera, even with gyro data, you're going to get rolling shutter. What you are seeing, and I forget who did the good video of this recently that kind of explained why it feels like you're getting better rolling shutter, is perspective distortion. Perspective distortion is where as the sensors move in cameras, you start actually seeing your corners do this, which is the warpy corners. That's what gets corrected with the stabilization info. Rolling shutter is still rolling shutter. You're still going to have, if you whip pan, you'll have the same stuff there. So, as far as gyro data goes, because I know that I've seen that there's one person asking a lot about this in the chat, which is a reminder, if you want me to actually respond to it, tag at LUMIX USA. If you don't tag it, I'm just going to skip over the question or the comment. As far as gyro goes, that's a mixed bag. I don't know if gyro data is going to be something that we want to add to the cameras or can add to the cameras. It has no bearing on whether or not Blackmagic is there or any other company as part of the OMAT Alliance. That's something that if we wanted to do it, we could just do it ourselves. The question I think honestly is, I don't know if that's something that we are looking at or planning to add, because by all accounts online, by the vast majority of accounts online, our stabilization is pretty damn good and doesn't need necessarily gyro. That said, I understand why some people want gyro data. I'm not saying that to discredit wanting gyro data. We have passed it on to our team over the last about year and a half, that it's kind of really become all of a sudden like a hot topic on cameras. But I haven't heard anything further than like, hey, it's possible, or no, it's not possible. I know that there are some hardware requirements for being able to do that, and the precision level that you need for the gyros to read that info. So that I don't know, but yeah. Cliff, great talking to you and Matt at NAB. Yes, it was great seeing you at NAB. I always like meeting people while they're there. Saw a lot of YouTuber stars there at the booth. Oh yeah. Any chance LUMIX will make an official USB-C dummy battery? I've asked about a DCC style adapter for USB-C. I don't know. I honestly don't know if that's something that's on our roadmap. If it is, it'd be cool. I'd really like something like that. But at the moment, yep, it's still, you need USB power. You got to go through the USB-C port on the camera. I do not recommend third-party power solutions for the most part. As me working in the company, I cannot recommend them. There are too many risks involved with third-party power solutions that can potentially fry your camera. And if that kind of thing happens, we're not responsible for it. That is negligent damage to the camera, so we don't cover things like that. So just keep that in mind if you're going to be powering your camera with things other than the factory provided batteries, or through certified USB-C power delivery with 9-volt 3 amp. So, can you recommend a cheaper alternative for the Sigma MC21 to EF, EF to L adapter? I want to try out some wide-angle lenses, but in my country, L-mount lenses aren't really available for rent. So, Jean-Paul, I honestly, especially with adapters, yeah, there are less expensive EF to L adapters out there, but I cannot recommend them. Not because I'm not supposed to, not because I can't recommend them for compatibility or anything like that. I cannot recommend them because I've used some of them and they're terrible. They either don't fully communicate the information, they either are trying to reverse engineer autofocusing communication protocols, in which case you get a worse experience on them. And I never want to point someone down a path with, especially something like that, that is going to give you a negative experience with it. The MC21 from Sigma is relatively inexpensive on the grand scale of what adapters cost, especially when you consider the fact that it is a first-party adapter. It is from Sigma. Sigma knows the communication protocols for L-mount because they helped write some of them. They are part of the L-mount Alliance. That means that if you want the best performance, if you want to get the best experience on adapting EF lenses to the L-mount system, whether it's our camera or Sigma's camera or Leica or even DJI, although I don't think you can do that because of the balancing things, or even the Blackmagic cameras that have L-mount, you'll want to use the Sigma MC21. It is just the best mount, on top of the fact that they help with the communication protocols. It also is a locking lens mount onto the newer cameras, which means that when you mount it there, if all you're ever going to put on the camera is EF lenses, you can literally screw that mount to the L mount and it will not move. Other adapters can cause some other challenges there, so just keep that in mind with it. Have you tested in NAB the DJI Focus Pro with the new LiDAR? Yeah, we actually had the running the new firmware. So nothing's changed from the previous firmware to the new one. The LiDAR tracking, 100% works great. I don't want to say flawless because you're working with a bunch of external pieces there and you can always still trick them. But we had the demos setting up in a crowded show floor with the LiDAR attached and using active track and all that kind of fun stuff. And yeah, it works beautifully. The new Focus Pro, so the handle, which is basically just an RS3 Pro just without the gimbal attached, or an RS4 Pro without the gimbal attached. Yeah, if you plug in, I was told by the guys over at DJI that if you plug in the camera hardwired like you do currently, yeah, it'll work. It'll do the same thing that we do on the gimbals today. So, big thumbs up there. Where did that other one go? Mary Kay, or Macari. Thanks, Sean, also for your time and patience. This is what I love doing. So, can you explain Rec 709 knee and some general settings to start off? Yes. Kind of. It's not a big area of my expertise, but adjusting the knee is the highlight roll-off point. So as you change that, it's where the highlights are going to roll off there, is my understanding. As you play with it, you'll see like your highlights will clip sooner, and then the roll-off to that point shifts. That's what the knee and stuff setups. As far as general settings to start off with, we're going to do a separate live stream on stuff like that. Sorry for not tagging before. I just want to ask why when I start autofocusing in manual mode using an exposure that is not 18% gray, the live view jumps to auto. Manual focus. That could be... let me double check here. That could be... where is it? Constant preview has a couple different settings in it. So if you go to set... Preview while MF assist on or off. This can change the way the display is working when you're in manual focus, especially if you're doing punch in, because if it's not synced with what you have this set for normally, so like if you have constant preview turned on, like I have it for aperture mode, just 'cause I only care about the aperture change there. I'm using my meters to determine my exposure, which I recommend everybody do. No camera screen is going to give you an actual representation of what your exposure is. They're all going to be shifted slightly. If you have constant preview on, you want to make sure this is turned on so that when you go into manual focus, it doesn't revert back to constant preview off, which means that it's trying to replicate a very clean looking image for framing, that kind of thing. Feature request, exposure comp reset on customizable button. Okay. We can pass that one on. Andy says, will some features of the S5 Mark II update trickle down to the GH6? I recently purchased my S5 Mark II and would love some features on my GH6. That I don't know. As far as feature trickle or cross use between lines, this update that's on the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX very heavily came from the G9 Mark II functionality. So I know that this is one of those things that actually came from Micro Four Thirds development up into full frame, not the other way around. So Micro Four Thirds is still a very vibrant system that allows us to develop cool stuff, deploy it, and then eventually bring up certain things to the full frame cameras that are applicable or capable to be brought up. So, okay. So, let's continue on here. The next thing I wanted to talk about as far as the firmware update goes is actually into the stabilization functionality. So everyone's spoken a lot about the stabilization updates that we've added to this camera, and a couple things to keep in mind here about it. And this will be a little bit of a quicker recap because we've talked about a lot of this stuff throughout the stream. If you want to get into the stabilization effects, the ones that were added for the video recording, it's going to be under the camcorder icon. You're going to go into others for video, and then image stabilization. Here, a couple things to look at. You've got operation mode, which on this particular lens, I'm on the 24 f1.8. I have it set to auto. It's just the way I use it. And then I have when to activate, I have set to always. This means that the display will always be stabilized. If you set this to half shutter, it means that you have to half press the shutter for the stabilizer to turn on. Cool? So let's turn this to always. Then you've got E-stabilization for video. This is where you have that option for standard or for high. Both of these modes have the perspective distortion correction enabled, which is that wobbly corner stuff. Standard is going to be a slight crop. I don't have the exact numbers for what the crop is. High is going to give you a bigger crop onto the footage. And that really, for the high option, is really made for situations where you're hand holding the camera. Potentially you have the need to make fast movements, physical movements with the camera. So I'm walking backwards. I'm vlogging, filming yourself kind of thing, which I know a lot of people have some hate against that, but I mean, you look at vast majority of the YouTube out there, if you want to cover products and you're at trade shows, you're vlogging. That's what enables you to do a lot of that stuff. And as Dustin has shown in many videos, Dustin Armstrong, if you don't follow his channel, I recommend you go take a look at his stuff. Literally running through a convention center, running through the halls at the hotels in Vegas hotels, running through fields with how stable a footage can get. Even videos from like Locke and some of the others out there on YouTube where it's stable to the point in high where you may not notice that the camera's moving even though you're holding it, but you are physically moving in the frame because your steps or your gait is actually being picked up. It's a weird thing to see, but it's a lot of fun with how stable this footage has gotten. And again, as I said, it makes it to the point where you can pretty much run with the camera. Not pretty much, you can run with the camera. Although, as I said in the training sessions I was doing last week, just be careful. Don't run into people testing this kind of thing. It makes a really cool setup for being able to, in less situations, need to bring a gimbal out with you. So that's where your stabilization settings are. Last but not least, as far as features go on this firmware, it's going to be actually into the photo functionality as far as updates go. And that's going to come down into the burst shooting options for stills capture. The S5 Mark II and the S5 Mark IIX can do 30 frames per second electronic shutter burst modes. And they've been able to do this since day one. You've got continuous focus with it. You've got single autofocus, manual focus, everything. It all works in 30 frames per second. What's new is the addition of being able to assign SH and SH pre. SH has always been 30 frames per second burst mode. SH pre is the new option for pre-burst. Now, when this is enabled, you also have the option to do pre-burst recording time. This lets me come in and say I want a half second, 1 second, or 1.5 seconds for how many frames I want before I've actually fully pressed the shutter button down. So for those that are counting, if you have 30 frames per second is your burst mode, so that's your burst rate. If you have half second, you're going to have 15 frames before you've actually fully pressed the shutter, and this activates when you half press it, starts storing these. So you'll have 15 frames, 30 frames, or 45 frames. That can all be stored before you press the shutter button down. So it makes it very easy, especially for anyone that may have a desire to do, like, say, any kind of wildlife photography where your patience is really what's going to be more important than anything else. Being able to sit in a blind, wait for that perfect moment, being able to watch, if you're watching like a heron fishing and you really want to get that perfect shot of just as its beak touches the water, or just as that fish is, you know, jumping out of the water, whatever it is, or that bird's going in for a capture of its prey. All of those things up until recently, you had to have a ton of patience, and you had to work a lot on your timing, on knowing the subject. And while you still need all of that stuff, you still need patience, you still need to know where to go, how to frame, what the subject is going to do. If you're doing this as far as, like, say, skateboarding, BMX, MotoGP, anything like that, if you're waiting for that perfect moment of, you know, in MotoGP, you're waiting for that perfect moment of the bike cresting the hill where he's coming out of that corner in a wheelie, and you want to get that perfect shot where he's just levitating off the ground. It used to be that you would just hammer away at your shutter and just fire and fire and fire as you hear a noise, as that bike's coming up over the corner, as that fish is going in for the jump, as that bird is coming in for that perfect moment. And that meant that you'd have potentially thousands of images that you end up having to go through for that little tiny segment of the photos that you've captured. Well, the pre-burst function that we have here makes it where I can be shooting, having those images be stored, and now it's just a matter of the second I see the motion, I just press the shutter button all the way down. Now, I've already had it half pressed so that I'm storing these in the buffer. When I fully press that shutter button down, it dumps that 15, 30, or 45 frames on the S5 Mark II and Mark IIX, dumps those into storage, and then I can continue the shutter throughout. So this is a mode that really makes it easy for those, like when you really want to get that shot if you've never really had much experience in it, or maybe your timing is just not as good, or reaction timing is just not as good as it once was. I know mine isn't. This gives me flexibility there. And the reason we allow you to change the timing on it, so being able to go in and say, hey, I want half second, 1 second, or 1.5 second, this is so that as you start to go through it, if you know that you've got pretty good reaction time and you can hit it within 15 frames, cool, set it to half second. If you're just working up to this, or it's a new subject that you're photographing, set it to 1.5 seconds. Give yourself enough flexibility there. It makes that type of photo capture more enjoyable even though it takes some of the skill out of what traditionally you had to really cultivate over a lot of time. So, yeah, that's the burst photography mode. Let's go back to some questions here. Let's see here. Nocturnal says, any chance of getting sensor shift internal star tracking like the Pentax Astro Tracer? This uses IBIS motors to move the sensor. The hardware is already in the cameras. So I don't know if something like that would be doable. When you start looking at stuff like that, as far as like various specialty modes that companies do with the tech that's in there, they could have licensing on things. They could have other hardware in there that is much more complicated than just the IBIS. All modern cameras most modern cameras are using magnetic stabilization systems, which do have a lot of high precision, and we do have ridiculously high precision as far as control goes. But I don't know if something like an Astro Tracer style update could be added to it. I can ask. Andy says, I need to cover an event with the GH6 and an S5 Mark II, but I need to power the cameras for around 9 hours. What do you recommend me do besides huge V-mount batteries? That's a good question. Do I have mine? Aha. So, if you have to cover it for a long event, I know this is a little counter to what you were just saying about V-mount batteries, but I recommend things like this. This is the FX Lion. This is the big one, or one of the bigger ones that they make. This one is 98 watt hour. The reason I recommend stuff like this is that yes, it's a V-mount battery, but that means that the mounting solutions are actually pretty wild out there. You can even rig up something where it's a V-lock on here, and if you just want it on a belt. But the reason why for this is down to what you have up here. USB-C output. That would let you power your camera. This does support 9 volt 3 amp. This will let me power the camera all day. And it's a little bit better than using something like this. This is just an Anker. This is one of the approved ones, the PowerCore. Man, it's so beat up on the bottom of this one. PowerCore 26800. 26,800. This is another one. Again, USB-C gives me the power delivery. That's what I'd probably recommend. The other nice thing is that things like the FX Lion, which I prefer over all the other companies that are out there knocking this design off. I think they're not. I don't know. Maybe they're not knocking it off, but this was a first experience with this style where you have USB-C. The big thing is that this one is charged over USB-C as well, so you're not stuck into having to need V-mount chargers for it. So that's what I'd recommend for powering, because then you also don't need an external DTAP adapter for it, and if you've got monitors, you can plug them in that way too. Let's see here. I got probably about another 5 minutes, and then I got to call it because my voice is starting to go, actually. As some of you can probably already hear. Let's see here. Where did we go? Here we go. Would love a wireless audio solution similar to the Rode DJI to be used directly on the camera hot shoe for the S5II and the X. Yeah, that was a question that came up before about the DJI adapter now that you can use to plug directly in. I think it's the Sony cameras. We've brought that up to our team because DJI is an L-Mount Alliance partner. So it would be interesting to see if that's something that could come because we do have audio pass into the camera through our hot shoe for the XLR1. So we'll ask. Do you know if L-Mount is autofocus locked to its ecosystem? I want to buy a Laowa 10mm, but it's only available manual focus on L-Mount and autofocus with E and Nikon mount. That I believe is Laowa's situation. The L-Mount is owned by Leica. Leica owns the mount. Leica, Sigma, Panasonic, DJI, Blackmagic, Astro Design, Samyang, all the other companies that are now Blackmagic that are part of the L-mount Alliance, it is Leica's mount that we are all collectively designing on. Laowa is not part of the L-mount Alliance, as far as I know, so it would be, as far as Laowa having to approach Leica for that. Any camera brand, typically the autofocus communication stuff is going to be held within whoever makes the mount. But clearly on L-mount, you've got many manufacturers part of it. So reality is that those are conversations that are well above my pay grade as far as what companies are part of it. So yeah, there you go. With LUMIX's expertise with mixed hybrid media space, please suggest the engineers bring back snapping photos while shooting video in full frame like the GH4. That with real-time LUT equals a big win. I mean, you still have that functionality. It's just when you're recording video, you're not going to snap a still out of it. You're just going to play it back, hit the menu set button, and it will save a JPEG out of it, just like it does. As cameras start recording higher resolutions and faster frame rates, the need for things like that has diminished to the point where, truthfully, if you do need to pull a still out of it, you just pull it out of post, just by playing back the footage. When it's played back, like I said, just push the menu set button, you save that file out. While you're recording, you're not going to be able to do anything with that still anyway, so as far as a workflow perspective, it's about the same time. Al says, at the risk of annoying you, I respectfully disagree. If you set stabilization strength to 0 on your BMD camera gyro, it will not stabilize at all, but it will fix jello effect. You can disagree. It does not fix jello effect. If anything, that's going to be a... that's different. Let's put it that way. Fixing jello effect is digitally manipulating an image to go back. That isn't gyro. That's not gyro stabilization stuff. Sorry, I did not explain myself properly before. What I meant is that whenever I hit the AF button in constant preview, gets turned off and I can't see my exposure. That might be... Well, that could be a couple of things. That could be that when you're doing that, the actual exposure values that you're trying to create are that underexposed, that it's darkening the screen out. That could be the mix of using constant preview versus not using constant preview. So a little bit of a play around with the different constant preview settings. That might help you there. Can you say how much X the actual difference stabilization modes crops in? Unfortunately, Urban, I don't have those exact numbers for you. So for the new pre-burst function to work, does this mean I need to reactivate the half-press focus shutter function in focus menu? That's a good question. I have not tested that because I don't use back button focus, but I can take a look and check for you. Yeah, it's a good question. If you have the camera or a G9 Mark II, you can test that, because the G9 Mark II has the pre-burst function as well. Autofocus for video is great, but for photography, it's inconsistent. Sometimes I have to half-press the shutter button to get good focus. Any settings to improve AF for photography? So, Steph, are you... So, autofocus for photography... are you wanting the camera to always be autofocusing just like it does in video so that it's always constantly running? Because if you want that, you can turn that on. It will eat more battery. But if you're going to be doing continuous autofocus, just keep the shutter button half pressed and you're good. A lot of it will also come down to the type of subject that you're photographing. If you're going to go through, you have various different AF custom settings. I did a video a number of weeks ago that I'll try to remember to link to that actually covers the various different AF custom settings in the system, because it's also quite possible that if you've got it set at set 1, which is how it comes out of the box, that's made for very general use. As you go through the different modes, that's where it's for like faster paced motion, for more erratic subjects that are moving. You've got a bunch of different options there to select for the different styles. Someone says, can I just say that I was shooting in snowy conditions and the autofocus consistently jumped to the snowflakes in front of the subject? Maybe you could pass this info on to the engineers. I have passed that on to the engineers, but I can also tell you that I have 1000% experienced the exact same thing with all of the other camera brands. Phase detect is a not infallible system. Heavy rain, snow, anything that is thick enough to cover an autofocus point can trip up phase detect. Phase detect is literally reading the distance of an object that's in the plane that it's using, or within the pixels that it's using for phase. So if you've got a subject here and you've got heavy snow in front of them, yeah, phase detect's gonna potentially see that and jump to that. It depends on how hard you set the stickiness to the subject. That's something that's always being worked on with all camera brands. But it's not something that is explicitly that we do that others don't. Heavy rain and heavy snow can cause those problems across the board. All right, cool. Last thing here. It is 2:30, so I do have to wrap because my voice is pretty much dead. Thanks, Sean, for clarification. I was wondering also if there's a way to create a LUT from an existing one in Lightroom for my photography side. Really good question. So with if you've already created presets in Lightroom, there are programs that can take those presets and convert them to LUTs. Then what you can do is bring that into Photoshop instead of Lightroom, apply that LUT as a layer, do the other edits that you want as layers, and then you can save that edit out in Photoshop as a LUT, so that you have that new look applied with all those base changes to it. So you can do it. You just have, it's a little bit of a different workaround because you want to use a LUT and then apply something on top of it. So with that, everybody, thank you all so much for sticking with me for this hour and a half that we've been streaming. These are so much fun. I'm so happy to be back doing these. Programming notes, I will be back again live. I will be back live again next week, next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Then I will be out again the following week, unfortunately. Taking a little bit of time. It's been a crazy couple of weeks and kind of need some time off. So we'll have, next week is a live stream. The following week will be a recorded stream. Then the following week after that, we'll be live again. After that, we've got a couple other things coming up. We've got Cinegear is going to be the next show that we will be at. So if you are in LA, or actually if you're in Burbank, make sure to check out Cinegear if it's a show that you wanted to attend. We will be there. If you go to Cinegear's website, you can see where we're going to be at the show. And then, yeah, other than that, if you haven't already, make sure to get your camera updated. Hopefully today I walked you through some of how to get to these settings, where they are, what they do. Once this video gets posted, I'll make sure to get the timestamps set so you can jump right to the various different settings for it. And as always, if you like this stream, if you like the content that we put out today, make sure to give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you don't already. It helps us out tremendously. Share these videos to people that you think may find them useful. That's what helps us grow this platform. And outside of that, thank you all so much again for tuning in, the amazing questions, the awesome commentary. It's why I love doing these things, and I will keep doing them as long as they allow me to. Other than that, see you all next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on YouTube. Later, y'all.